Search is changing. The way people find brands, discover products, and make decisions is being rebuilt around AI. And the rules that governed how you show up and the SEO playbook that took 20 years to write are being rewritten faster than most marketing organizations can read them. But here's the bit that doesn't get talked about enough. This isn't just a text problem. It isn't about rewriting website copy, restructuring your content for AI crawlers. The shift is multimodal. Video, image, audio, the full breadth of how a brand expresses itself is now part of how AI understands and describes you. And the brands that grasp that earliest are already pulling ahead. Welcome back to the Pencil Perspective. I'm Tim, joined today by Toby, Pencil COO, who has stepped in for Will. Hi, Toby.
Hi, Tim.
And today, our guest is Jack Smyth. Hi, Jack.
Hi, how's it going, Tim?
So, Jack is country lead for Australia at the Brandtech Group. And before that, he was a partner at Brandtech Media Group and spent time at Jellyfish, the group's media and performance arm, which is where a lot of the thinking on GEO and share of model has been developed. What that career arc gives Jack is something genuinely rare in this conversation. He's someone who's watched media innovation evolve from the inside, at scale, across markets, for some of the world's biggest brands, and who is now sitting inside the organization that is building the tools to navigate the next shift. Today, Jack's going to make the case that video is the most underestimated signal in GEO. Jack, you've been working in media innovation for a pretty long time. You've seen waves of change come through, programmatic, social, data-driven. Where does GEO sit in that history for you? Is this another wave or is this structurally different?
It's a fantastic question because I think it's another wave that actually loops back to a lot of the lessons that many marketers have learned over the course of their careers. So let's take video as an example from your great introduction, Tim. We've known for decades that video is the most effective way to capture a human's attention, and it's the most effective format to convey what makes your brand unique. It just so happens that the more we learn about how AI models learn about the world and brands and products, that video has turned out to be the most effective format to capture their attention. So it is a seismic shift. I think every marketer has to realize that every single brief that they write has a new audience. The AI models that act on behalf of their human audiences. But the mechanics, if you will, the tactics of capturing that new audience's attention are refreshingly and maybe reassuringly familiar. It's just a question of how that audience, and by that audience I mean AI, differs. And that's where it gets really interesting about expressing your brand in a memorable way for super intelligence. And I think a lot of creative teams are getting excited about that challenge. You know, what would capture your attention if you had watched and learned and listened and read nearly everything on the Western internet for the last 3 decades? That's a really, really exciting creative challenge for the teams and the marketers who are willing to try and answer that question.
Jack, thank you so much for making the time to have a chat, and it's good to see you again. I don't see you enough these days. This might be a trivial question for you, and frankly, maybe in general, but I think it's helpful to ground folks who are perhaps not as familiar. And that's what GEO actually means. Like I said, trivial. But I think even more so from the perspective of having watched SEO evolve, and I think inevitably, I mean, you've got LinkedIn like I have, the comparisons between the two are rife. And you spent years working on media innovation, as Tim mentioned, at a time when SEO was already a reasonably mature discipline. Now we're talking about GEO and even in some cases coined terms like share of model, and I mean, your experience speaks for itself. But for someone who knows the difference from the inside, what is the real gap between the two? Yes, around the definition itself, but also the implication for how a brand has to think and work. I'd be curious if you entertain and humor me with that question.
It's a great question. And it's another good example of history might not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. A lot of the tactics you recognize from SEO are applicable in GEO with some important nuances. So to start with some simple definitions, GEO stands for Generative Engine Optimisation. And those generative engines are the AI models that I was referring to earlier. So think of them like Google's Gemini. Gemini reaches 2 billion people every single week. They see the answers generated by Gemini in Google's AI overviews, inside the Gemini app, and across a host of different surfaces. So think of that as one generative engine with reach far beyond. Only a handful of platforms could even rival it. So in that case, GEO is a generative engine. And then the optimization question becomes really interesting because those generative engines, and Gemini is by far the most influential, followed by OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, Perplexity, DeepSeek, or Meta AI. Those models have learned about a category, a brand, and a product largely through their training data. And that's often what we refer to when we think about a knowledge cutoff. Billions of different data points from text, image, audio, and video that effectively help that model think about the world. You can optimize your content to try and stand out in that training set. Or you can optimize to be one of the first topical and timely sources those models find when they look beyond their training set. So when you and I interact with Google AI Overview, or even more so Google's AI Mode, when I prompt it and ask a question, it will go and browse the web to inform its answer. And it can, in some cases, look at 400, 500 different domains, far more than you and I, even you, Toby, with the amount of tabs that you leave open. You cannot rival AI Mode. So that already gives you a hint about the optimization approach. An element of it is strategic. You are already part of someone else's training set. Every asset that you have published over the lifespan of your brand is encoded and understood and referenced inside these models. But also you're part of that topical window. What happens when they go out and look for new and relevant information to ensure they give you the best answer? So between those two levers of optimization, part of it lands in the brand world, because in that case, it's not just the SEO team's responsibility. You may build a brilliant website that can be indexed and accessed and understood by AI agents. But if your Super Bowl campaign is talking about something completely different, and it lives on YouTube and becomes part of someone else's training set, there's some cognitive dissonance there for an AI model. Similarly then, in that case, if you are purely a brand marketer, you know what your brand can stand for. But every marketer knows that doesn't mean everyone on your team is sticking to the same brief and creating consistent, memorable assets.
Right. And I mean, you even, before we started the conversation today, you had corrected Tim and I because we had even our framing of the conversation with GEO. Is that in itself quite limiting? There's more to it than that, right? You had talked to us about generative engine marketing more holistically. And I think inevitably that speaks to the multimodality and the shift inherent therein too. But maybe you could explain what you have just educated us 5 minutes ago as well.
Absolutely. I think, you've hit the nail on the head there, that there is a fear and a risk that if we just stick to GEO as the linear evolution of SEO, we're not really capturing the full picture. And to treat GEO as just the next stage of SEO, where your web content is the primary input, that really ignores the fact that these models and these generative engines are multimodal. So they can read, they can look at an image and understand the composition, the color, the gradient, everything in the background of Tim's photo, for example. They can listen to audio. They hopefully recognize I have an Australian accent. That's why I sound better than all of you.
Oh,
and then,
right.
And then they can watch video. You can see your kind of, your reply to that comment and understand that you don't agree with that sentiment at all.
Well, I'm from Barbados, so I sound great.
Well, I mean, okay, so the second best accent on this call. But to that point, the last 15 seconds of this podcast would teach a model a lot about us. And there's a wealth of information that's encoded in those modalities of video, audio, image, and text. So as a marketer, if you're really only focusing on text, which if you boil down GEO to primarily being content on your website that can be referenced and indexed and cited, well, you can already see you're missing at least 75% of the picture. And then if we go back to what we spoke around history repeating itself, a video is a much better way to express your brand. A blog post saying the 7 reasons that I love, for example, Hellmann's mayonnaise, maybe a great set of factual reasons about why it's healthy for you, it's versatile, and it makes delicious sandwiches. But to watch someone bite in to a recipe made with Hellmann's and smile, that gives a model a much better idea about that's a brand that people aspire to or want or feel enjoyment around. So multimodality means we go from GEO to GEM. And GEM is Generative Engine Marketing. It reflects the broader scope of all of the levers that a marketing team can pull to shape the perception of their brand and ensure that that model is ultimately going to be the ultimate influencer. It will have the best opinion of your brand, which will make it more likely to recommend your brand. It will reference your content as a great expression of what makes you unique. And in that case, this isn't a job for an SEO team. It's a job for a CMO. Why would that model choose your brand? And how do you make sure every asset you publish across all those modalities represents the best your brand can be?
I think you framed that incredibly well. Thank you. And I think that's a profound difference from, I think, a lot of folks, how they perceive GEO and sort of as a linear evolution from SEO, when in fact it's actually something profoundly different. And capturing it with the notion of GEM, I think is amazing to kind of understand. So thank you for that.
I feel the need to just put a disclaimer out there that we're not sponsored by Hellmann's, but you've made me super hungry. So
there you are.
Marketing
it's the Dinner Time podcast.
We've talked in very general terms about GEO and GEM so far, but let's actually think share of model. So we have a tool for this, and you're in the organization that built it. Let's assume that some of our audience won't have heard of share of model before. So could you give me some of the basics? What is it? What does it measure? And why is it a better frame than the metrics that CMOs might already have on their dashboards?
Absolutely. Share Model is a platform that we launched in 2023. So well before the current hype wave that has seen close to $1.8 billion invested in these tools. And we were not only the first platform to market, we were the first platform to embrace the potential of multimodality. So if you think of GEM as the capability, Share a Model is the metric. And we specifically call it Share a Model because we believe just as you track your share of voice, you should track your share of model recommendations that reference your brand. And our work with leading publishers like Harvard Business Review, where we conducted a longitudinal study looking at 4 different categories in the biggest markets around the world, found that the brands with the highest share of model also grew their share of market faster than the average competitor. So it's best to think of your share of model as a leading metric. The greater your share of model recommendations, the greater your share of market. And it's a platform that we launched that helped brands then start to unpack how models think about their brand and then critically which assets are driving and contributing to that perception. So it started from a very humble place. We used a handful of the world's most influential models, and very simply, we asked them questions every single day to articulate their reasoning and their rationale. Then we started to unpick the language of these large language models to look for patterns. And in that case, we're not like any of those other GEO visibility platforms that record a couple of hundred prompts and hope that they're representative. We're really focused on the patterns in model responses that allow you to understand the underlying associations they've formed in their training set. So it's a really foundational insight about how these models think about your brand, because that empowers marketers to create whichever asset they need or want, inspired by those patterns and trends. It's a much richer brief than, hey, we need a listicle with why we're better than 10 other CRM platforms. And please always use the word accessible. In that case, it helps you understand share a model as a recommendation set. It helps you understand the perception of your brand And then critically, it allows you to use those models to evaluate your assets. If Meta AI is going to learn about your brand from your Instagram Reels, well, then you need to know what Meta AI thinks about your Instagram Reels. So you can upload content, or thanks now to our partnership with Pencil, look through the assets in your library and understand how each individual asset would improve the perception of the relevant model that's going to see it and contribute in that case to your overall perception of your brand.
You mentioned it. You mentioned some practical applications of shared model already in the content production process or even the asset analysis process. Beyond the leveraging of the shared model itself and GEM as a discipline, are there things that brands are doing or marketing teams are doing uniquely that are helping them to pull ahead, given this frankly profound shift in the dynamic and the fact that there is now a new audience, as I think you talk about it, right? Are there sort of distinct factors about teams that help them to capitalize on the opportunity at hand? I'd be curious to know, because I'm sure you work with quite a few.
It's a great question. And for the answer, I'll give you one thing that you should not do and one thing that great brands are doing. And I want to start with what you shouldn't do, because I feel very passionately about this space. If you consider these models as members of your audience, you've never had an audience as patient and intelligent and as rigorous as an AI model, pixel by pixel, unpicking what makes your brand. A lot of brands think that the best way to get a model to have a better perception is to spam it. And they use what we call programmatic SEO to create hundreds, if not thousands of pages with pretty much identical content that's just keyword stuffed. If they look at the way a model talks about CRM, to pick on that category, they just create a blog post that is a list of all the reasons why they're better than the others. There's no human creativity in that. And we're increasingly seeing a lot of the brands who use that tactic rank and tank. Their AI visibility goes up vertically, and then very quickly they realize there's no substance to it. And in many cases, case studies from our biggest competitors are actually now underwater. They're below where they started when they were implementing these tactics. So not only has it not worked, they've actively set their brand back by spamming the models with lookalike, cookie cutter content. Now, what keeps the brands that are doing this very well is one, respect for the model. You don't really think you're going to outwit something that effectively is, super intelligence. It's on par, if not at least different to humans. Video as the most effective medium around how to train a model. And this is a really interesting insight around video from the model's point of view. We looked at AI recommendations that represent around $1 trillion of consumer spending. So across our 3 biggest markets, every major model, every major category, the sum total of a good chunk of the world's economy. The only platform that appeared across every single AI model and every single category was YouTube. And when we drilled into what YouTube content was being surfaced, the average video was 11 minutes long. It looked probably something similar to this. A group of people who are passionate about a product, often streaming or recording a clip in their bedroom, their bathroom, or their office about why they cared so much about a product. Some of these videos even had spreadsheets in the background. But the thing that united them was that they were passionate, expert, and authoritative people, and models were learning from their content about which brands to recommend. So I keep on coming back to that term of respect. Respect the model, because it's going to pretty quickly realize you're trying to trick it, and respect the people who talk about your brand, the people who are willing to be a part of that story, because models increasingly learn a lot more from a 10-minute video around a passionate advocate or someone simply explaining the difference than a really polished web page or a blog post with a bunch of stats that we all know are inflated.
I love the idea actually of the incentive being towards substance. That's got to be a fantastic thing for content and what we're confronted with online in general. So that's quite reassuring to hear, frankly. So I'm glad to hear it.
This is the wonderful nature of this, where every conversation we have with a client follows a similar arc. The first half is, oh my God, this is a fundamental change with, frankly, inhuman intelligence. Then there's this reassuring loop where you're like, but wait, I'm actually good at this. As a marketer, I know how to convey what makes my brand unique. Many marketers, of course, already have influencers on their plan. It just turns out those influencers have a new audience too. There are AI models watching and learning from every single thing they say. So as a marketer, you've got this incredible opportunity now to work with people who care as much about your brand as you do. And it turns out the models care more about them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just love hearing about how the role of human is still so vitally important in this dynamic. Before we move on, thinking about humans in the loop to the pencil side of this, I've got one last question for you around GEO or GEM. So if you could put one question in front of every CMO that you've worked with, a question about GEO or GEM and multimodality that most of them haven't considered yet, what would that be?
I would say my question would be to ask a CMO, what's the number one reason to recommend their brand? And I chose that because it's a strategic question. Can you distill what makes your brand unique into something that you or I or AI could understand? Because I want to be really clear, there's tons of technical noise in GEO as we know it. Do you have the right schema? Are you using LLMs.txt? All of these little hacks that are just incremental changes to make it easier for an LLM crawler, an agent to learn about your brand. But no one's asking what they should be learning. And no one's asking a question, particularly to a CMO or head of marketing. If you had to distill the reason to recommend your brand to someone who has learned about a good chunk of human civilization as we know it for the last few decades, what would you say? And it better not be something like, well, we believe in purpose, or, well, we think we're marginally cheaper. Like, you've got to find something unique about your brand that isn't purely factual, we're always on sale, or isn't purely emotional, we believe in an abstract idea. Because these models are going to be the filter, they're the medium for millions, not billions of people deciding what to buy. So if you can't sum it up, why do you expect AI to do it?
And hopefully that gives some good incentive for all the brand marketers out there who have, and perhaps historically are organizations who have thought of performance marketing or SEO, or even perhaps by extension GEM as something separate from brand. If anything, it is even more pronounced now, the importance of clarifying the message and having a very crystal clear view of the position of your brand.
Toby, GEO is multimodal. Video, as we've discussed, is an underestimated signal, and share of model is the metric that tells you where you actually stand. Are enterprise clients coming to Pencil already thinking in those terms, or are we still at a point in time where that's a conversation that we're leading and we're bringing up from scratch?
It's a good question. I mean, frankly, Jack and I, Will and I, we talk about this quite often. I think that the most profound questions that a CMO or a marketing organization, leadership, whomever in that organization needs to be asking themselves right now is, what does AI think about my brand? Given how important the perception, as Jack has mentioned so eloquently and more eloquently than I could, what that means for brands today and discovery of individuals, and or even in some cases purchase of products directly from the models themselves and model providers. As well as the implication of the same technology, AI, in the production of content, which is also very much in the remit of these organizations, right? These marketing teams. So those are the two, and both born out of AI, but two very different sort of dimensions to the same technology implication. On the former, Jack, share of model, GEM, that discipline, that's very much in the minds of a CMO, and that's where that whole endeavor came from, right? Jack and the team started this in 2023 to capitalize on what they saw to be the future. Pencil, by comparison, is predicated on the influence of AI in the production process, and increasingly, given that we are now an operating system and not simply a platform for generating creative work, whether that's text, image, or video, we also now pull the insights from tools like shared model or other signals into the platform to not just produce content at a faster rate or higher volume, but better performing content. That is the key to that marriage, right, of those two disciplines. And that's why we've been working together with Jack and the team so viciously on bringing that to life in platform, because Jack mentioned it himself. The ability of AI to digest information at a scale, like we can have 25 tabs open, that's done in the blink of an eye. And I think if you consider the fact that you could connect your ad accounts, you can introduce proprietary signals that perhaps are unique to your brand, as well as the shared model signal into the production of the content itself. That's a very interesting territory, because then you're talking about capitalizing on the fact that it is quite a complex thing to target now, not only the proliferation of channels where human beings used to be, which let's be honest, how much that's exploded over the past 10 to 15 years. Now you have an entirely new audience, each with their own unique predisposition, depending on the model that you're looking at. To keep up with that is challenging, right? Let's be honest. So you need the help of, guess what? The same technology via a different mechanism, in this case, pencil or production tool for that matter, to be able to satiate that increasing demand on a business. So that's a very long-winded way of answering your question.
That was a great answer, really, really thorough. And, it's always a great moment for me when I feel like I'm learning more about pencil, even from the inside.
Well, that's good.
May I ask a question, Tim?
Oh,
Go for it, Jack.
And now I'm worried.
Toby, what you just said around the volume of assets that an AI model can understand and the corresponding expectation on a marketer that they need an efficient, brand safe way to generate those. I would love to learn a little more around how marketers in pencil can use shared model to pre-flight test their assets. Because if AI models are a member of your audience, it feels like a great use case for a custom score or even the direct integration to learn about how that asset could impact the perception of your brand as an AI model effectively watches and ingests it.
So maybe I'll take a step back to explain the two main manifestations of the shared model within the context of pencil. On the one hand, you have the shared model signal. You can use it to, for example, write strategy, develop concepts, and ultimately produce content, which is the generative side of leveraging that signal to produce content that satiates, let's say, the perceptions of what you're trying to achieve for your brand. Yes. And the other is to predict whether that asset, or perhaps even historical legacy assets or new assets that you've generated, do actually satiate that need. And that's the predictive side. That's the scoring side. So in pencil, to Jack's point, you can look into your asset library, let's say as a brand, let's say Hellman's again, and maybe it's content that you've produced historically or net new content, and you could attach a score, a shared model score, and that shared model score will be set based on the perceptions of your brand across the various models, to give you a sense of, should I even launch this asset, or should I make tweaks based on the signal and the predictive score that you've gotten, which also gives you quite detailed anecdotes around what can be changed to achieve a better score. So it effectively is, it's not only about volume, right? Jack, we know this. Yes, volume is important if you consider the massive amount of channels that we have, but in its own right, it won't move the needle. What we need to be doing is producing content, I suppose, more purposefully, more intentionally, using signal like the shared model signal in a way that really gets you the result that you want. Hope that answers your question.
It does, and it's part of what makes me so excited to be part of Brandtech, because the dynamic you just described really demonstrates how share model and pencil is far more than sum of parts. For share models specifically, we know that there's incredible interest in similar tools, but they really just focus on your website. They don't have the ability to connect to pencil to generate the full breadth of multimodal content that models are looking for. And they certainly don't have the ability to use pencil's predictive scores or any of the additional insights there to guide a marketing team through what to create and how that asset may perform. And similarly then in that case, share model benefits an enormous amount from the collective learnings of all of the ad account integrations for Pencil. Because a big part of the future of GEO as we know it includes paid media. We see it more and more every day in our share model platform. Paid assets like YouTube Shorts that you might use for a campaign now also appear in AI overviews. So your paid assets are part of your generative story. And in that case, again, every asset has two audiences. It's really critical to have one platform and point of view where marketers know what is being created by which teams, why they're doing it, and how it's likely to perform when they publish it for human audiences and AI.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this conversation before, right? That's where we start to salivate, because when you came to me and you said, when you sort of showed me how important and the YouTube videos and the YouTube content is becoming in the ranking of brand perception with the models, we married that to the predictive technology and YouTube Shorts as a paid media opportunity. I think we started to see it became a no-brainer, right? Like I think that's really, really, really exciting territory. And I'm to your point, right? I'm just grateful that we get to bring this stuff together, because frankly, like our nerding out on it is one thing, but the impact on brands that we're seeing is a very real thing that I think we even get more excited about.
Absolutely. I mean, it changes the whole conversation around ROI, because if one asset will reach two audiences with every impression, and you know one of those audiences is very influential, if you really do grow your share model, you're going to see significant change in share market. Perhaps this is the podcast where we coin ROAI or something similar or cool like that. Just throwing it out there.
So the points that Jack's put forward today are really worth sitting with. GEO isn't just a text problem. It's not about rewriting website copy. It's not about trying to trick the models. It's about a full picture of how your brand truly expresses itself. The video, the imagery, the multimodal breadth of everything you produce and that you put into the world, and the passion and the human creativity that sits behind that. Because that's what AI models are trained on. That's what shapes the answer when someone asks AI to recommend a brand in your category. And here's the thing that makes Jack's career a credible source of truth for this. He's been inside the organizations, building the innovation, running the experiments, reading the data. This isn't a prediction. This is a pattern that he's already seen. This is a story that's already underway. Share of model tells you the score, and your score exists whether you've looked at it or not. The AI already has an opinion about your brand. The question is, are you managing that, or are you leaving it to chance? Pencil is the production capability that lets you do something about it at the speed, scale, and multimodal range that actually moves the needle. The window to get ahead of this is still open, but the brands moving now are the ones who will be hardest to catch up with. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Toby.
Thank you so much, Tim. And Jack, thank you so much for dialing in.
Of course. Thank you so much. As you guys can tell, this is my favorite topic.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you everyone who's listened, and see you next time. The Pencil Perspective. New episodes bi-weekly.